My name is Phil, and I am a machinima creator, which is kind of more of an animator, storyteller, etc. I have a YouTube channel where most of my work gets released. Got a few thousand subscribers. One of my videos eclipsed into the millions of views, but most of them, for the most part, I'm a small YouTuber. I've been on YouTube really since the platform launched, and have had various periods of activity, spaced out by periods of inactivity. But I would say since about 2020 or so, I started getting really active and have been putting out weekly videos on Fridays for a few years now. My background doesn't come from film, certainly not in any formal training kind of sense. I've always been a fan of the movies and TV and storytelling in a medium like that, but I don't really have any background in the industry at all. I'm a musician and a composer, again, as a hobby, not as a career. And I've always gravitated towards and been pretty strong in creative writing. My first films, I experimented around with the family camcorder, and the focus typically was a sketch comedy kind of context. When I discovered Quake movies, or what would later become known as machinima, that would have been in 1998. My first narrative machinima was made in 1999, a sitcom parody, about 22 minutes long. And I've never really looked back since. I've tried to evolve and get better at what I do, get a little more sophisticated with my storytelling, best I can, and to support the community around me who are also trying to do those same things. So when I can, I'll do tutorials or podcasting or how-to videos. I don't know, it just feels like that's a responsible thing to do, right? To kind of give back. I certainly wouldn't be where I am without the support of colleagues and other people involved with this thing we call machinima. So what in the world am I doing fooling around with a bunch of AI tools to make a movie? Well, since AI tools have been around, I've been, like most people, at least playing around with them a bit, experimenting. Occasionally, the use of one of them will work its way into one of my shorts for some little thing here or there. Sometimes I use AI to translate my voice performances into a different sounding voice. Maybe render a backdrop here and there, but I've never really, until this project, never really even thought about trying to do basically an almost entirely AI tools project. Now, as someone who can create films with other traditional animation methods, why would I even want to do that? Well, that's a good question. That's a really good question. Well, during the course of a machinima-themed podcast that I take part in, it's called And Now for Something Completely Machinima. We've been doing that podcast for a few years now. There's 4 of us that are co-hosts on there, and we review work in this general space of machinima, virtual production, and all that kind of thing. And we've been keeping an eye on what's going on with AI-generated video as well. Mainly just because it's an interesting development. Most of what comes out of it is unimpressive, but most of what comes out of machinima isn't particularly impressive either, so maybe that's why I'm okay with tolerating some of that. Well, we came across a creator during the course of that show who goes by the name of NeuralViz. And he created some video using almost exclusively AI tools for everything except the writing, basically. And it was so impressive and made us laugh so hard. It was really good comedy and really well executed. And we thought, this is impressive. Like, this is an interesting use of these tools. And NeuralViz was kind enough to sort of detail what his process was, how he used a variety of these AI tools to get to his finished product. And a discussion came up amongst us on the podcast of, gee, I wonder if someone else could emulate that process. And, you know, because I don't have enough to do, wink, wink, I volunteered to take that on as a challenge. What could I make? Not a whole series like he's doing, but just if I set out to just make one short film, using only the tools that NeuralViz used, or at least tools that are analogous to those, but otherwise following a very, very similar process, what kind of end result could I get? So I guess in a way this was a bet. There just wasn't any money involved, but it was a challenge, and I thought, well, let's give this a shot. And it'll do a couple things. It'll answer our question, what could someone else do with that process? But it also will give me a chance to take a closer look at some of these tools that prior to now I had only dabbled with. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about AI generally, because this is a pretty hotly debated topic, and there are some strong points on both sides. Where do I fall on that spectrum? I don't know. I see some validity to both sides of the arguments. So let's talk about those real quick. The argument by those who are pro-AI are, these are just tools. They're tools that can be used by creative people to do things in new ways. And that's all they are. So why should we ignore an innovation in the area of tools? Now, there are some people who want to equivocate between making something with AI tools and actually making them as a human artist, and use the same term for those things, you know, that basically that person is also an artist. I think that's probably a bridge too far. It's not that these are no effort tools. There is an effort required to get good results out of AI tools. It's just not the same kind of effort at all. It's not the same kind of work. And I don't think it's beneficial to group those types of work under the same label. So I'm not taking up that position that, oh, AI art is art. I think that's debatable. But are these potentially tools that could be useful to a creative person without compromising their integrity as a creative person? I think that's the case. Now, on the other side of things, you've got the anti-AI crowd, and they've got some strong and valid points too. One of which is scrutiny of how ethically these AI tools are being sourced with their training data sets. Now, essentially, right now, these tools are pretty unregulated, and they're just scraping artistic works of human artists from available sources online, and they're using those in their, let's call it a recipe for remixing and generating things. They're using those, and often you can see evidence of the original works in what is generated by the AI. And the human artist's point of view on that, for those who are aligned against AI art, is that's theft. I don't think that's incorrect. I do think that we need to figure out how to make these tools operate ethically. The other objection that generally gets raised, but maybe isn't clearly articulated as well, is a notion that it's kind of offensive that somebody would call typing words into a prompt and getting a picture back. Human artists are a little bit offended by people who want to say, see, I'm doing the same thing you are. See, I'm just like you. What I'm doing is just as valid as what you took the time and had the talent to develop an expertise in doing by hand. I think there's validity to that. I think that feeling is very valid on the part of real artists. Let's call them handcrafters. It is kind of offensive. Think about it this way. If you were a golfer and you worked really hard to learn how to select the right club, you tee up the ball, you practice at driving ranges, and you go play golf and you hit the ball, and you develop a sense of how to get the ball to behave. And it's quite a bit of skill involved and a lot of practice to get your drives to go far and, to chip up onto the green and stay out of the sand traps and out of the water, and then finally putt the ball and get it into the hole. There's a lot of different overlapping skills there that involve getting your body to behave and move in certain ways, to exert the right pressure on the ball at the right angle and velocity and get it to do what you want, and measuring the wind and being able to sight distances and choose the appropriate tool for the right moment. That's what being a golfer is. Now imagine if you were a golfer, amateur or professional, and someone showed up to the course and said, hey, I've got this machine that tees up the ball for me, and it hits the ball with the appropriate club off the tee, and it even drives my golf cart to go to the next spot to hit the ball again, and basically takes care of everything from tee to the hole on the green. Takes care of it all. And I can use that and get a semi-pro golf score at the end of the day. Now, from a machine point of view, like from a technology point of view, it's hard to deny that that's not impressive. That's pretty neat that somebody was able to build a machine to do all that. But for that guy who shows up with that machine at the course to say, I'm a golfer just like you, yeah, not so much, right? I think that analogy works. So where am I at on AI art? I'm somewhere in the middle of all that. I think the tools are interesting. I suspect that there is a way to make use of those tools that isn't offensive to artists, that isn't stealing anyone's content. I'd like to think that at some point that's going to be possible. And if so, I've only got so many years on this earth, and I've got a whole lot of stories that I want to tell. So if something is going to help me get that done quicker, that's the draw. I'm not James Cameron. I don't have multi-million-dollar budgets and staff and all of that. I'm a solo creator. A tool like that could help me achieve more. Yeah, that's attractive for sure. But I want to be able to do that in a way that is ethical, that is not disrespectful of hardworking artists. So is AI at a place right now where I can do that? No, it's not. And that is a problem that we need to solve. So I'm entering into this with a little bit of trepidation, knowing that some people are so turned off by these tools because of those aspects of those tools that they probably won't even want to watch what I make at all, just on principle. And I can respect that. But just understand that what this is it's an experiment with the tools that are available right now, and with some human creative drive behind them, What can I get done? So that's what this is. So the first thing that I knew that I had to come up with is a story. Because of all the things that AI tools can potentially do or not do, one area that I had pretty much already ruled out, not just on principle, but even also with experimenting around with the capabilities, if there's one thing that AI cannot do well, it's tell a story. More to the point, create a story. That's going to be a human thing. And that's exactly what NeuralViz did as well. All the writing is by a human. And everything else that we use is going to key off of that writing. So what story could I tell? Well, NeuralViz tells, in his main series, tells a story that's kind of set in a futuristic sci-fi context, where these beings in the distant future are using vlogging and techniques, podcasting, techniques like that to communicate ideas. But they're using those techniques in the same way that we do right now in the 2020s. But they're set in this distant future. So it's this weird blend of modern cinema techniques, but with an ultra future setting. Kind of in the same vein of some of these AI generated vlogs that you'll see where it's, Sasquatch or stormtroopers going around, talking into their iPhones and telling you what's going on. There's a silliness to it, but that's essentially his approach. Well, I didn't really want to emulate that. First of all, just, for not copying someone else's idea, but also I just wasn't particularly inspired by that element of it. So instead of going forward into the future, I decided to go back into the past. There's a topic area that has been a hobbyist fascination of mine, really since my school days. And that is ancient civilizations. The legends around ancient civilizations. The myths. The rumors. Where did the pyramids come from? Who built the pyramids? How could they do that? Noah and the Great Flood. These are like these bigger than life stories that really defy conventional explanations in some ways. The idea of an ancient civilization with advanced technology. Did that exist? The city of Atlantis. All these strange landmarks that, thanks to Google Maps, we're all discovering are around the planet. These strange rock formations and, strange areas. Ruins that we don't really understand the origins of. Maybe natural formations that look unnatural in some way, and we wonder, what did those come from? The idea of aliens having visited us in the past. All that stuff. So I thought, let's use that as a setting. And instead of vlogging as the technique, let's use a documentary style. So we're going to have a documentary format that's similar to what we do nowadays, as if it was made about something that was happening countless thousands of years ago in some ancient civilization where everything's a little weird and where maybe we allude to some of these strange mysteries of the past and weave it all together into this weird situation. So that's what I did. I spent a few weeks on it, tuning up the idea, and came up with kind of a crazy scenario. And it's based on a theory that I saw out there in this whole ancient civilization, ancient acts of God type of category. The idea behind that was that the Great Flood, which has been documented in almost every ancient civilization in one way or the other, which seems to make it plausible that there was something like that that did happen at some point. So this theory that's being batted around is that we all know about plate tectonics and the theory of plate tectonics, and that at one time long ago, millions of years ago, all the continents were closer together in kind of one big supercontinent that they call Pangaea. And the generally accepted scientific theory is that there have been gradual movements of these plates, and the continents have drifted apart very slowly over millions and millions of years to be in the formation that they are now. And they're still moving somewhat, and that's what causes earthquakes, is when these plates are rubbing against each other and things like that, right? Well, there's a theory out there that entertains the idea of, what if that plate tectonics movement wasn't gradual? What if it was rapid? What if it all happened in a relatively short space of time? And that's what caused this great flood that all these civilizations seem to acknowledge happened in a very distant past. I just found that idea fascinating. And so I started structuring the story around that. That this is right on the precipice of that rapid plate tectonics theory coming to pass. So we're in Pangaea, and in a very short time, it's going to be the Great Flood and all these continents moving, etc. And so then my mind went to, well, what would have caused that? What if, ironically enough, this advanced civilization, in their hubris, did something that actually caused their own destruction? Wouldn't that be interesting? So that was the premise of our story. And then it was a matter of, okay, if this is a documentary, then who would be interviewed about this? There's going to be some people who are supportive of whatever it is, whatever action it is that's about to take place as progress, right? And then there's going to be some people in the camp of, this is a horrible idea. This is going to destroy the whole world. And of course, they won't be listened to. Where have we seen that before, you know? So that was that. That was the story. So one thing that I knew that this story needed was, if this is in a very ancient civilization, the names of things need to be a little strange. They're not going to be geographic references that we would use now, presuming that this whole civilization gets washed away by a giant flood. So the names need to be weird, but I got to keep it at least accessible for a modern audience. So I started coming up with these odd names for these characters. Some of them named after, ironically, famous mythical structures that we are aware of today. So yeah, there's a comic element to that. The idea that the Göbekli Tepe, I think is what it's called, and we've got somebody with that in their name. It's absurd, of course, the idea that our modern label for that is actually the name of the ancient person. But I thought it would be a fun way to tie in people with these strange places. So the reshot structure is this strange circular rock formation in the Sahara. I think it's the Sahara, somewhere in North Africa. And basically, it is thought that is... There's some who theorize maybe that was the city of Atlantis, and this used to be a lush green place, and then it got flooded, and now it's just a barren ruin. It's doubtful there's anything to that, but I thought it was a fun idea to play with. So I gave these people and these places, and even marked up the map with these strange names. My favorite of which I think is Krispia's last name, Barthceratops. That just seemed delightfully silly and stupid. To take the suffix of a dinosaur name and append it to just some name, Barth. As far as the network or the station ID or whatever you want to think of it as, that is kind of appended and prefixed on this documentary, this FHN. I can't remember what that's supposed to stand for. It probably has a meaning, but I forgot it. I didn't write down the origin of it, but I ended up with FHN as, like the call letters of some network that produces documentaries in this ancient civilization. So that full name there, FHN Gaze. Gaze, I just pulled out of the word gazette, which is a old, rarely used word anymore, but having to do with basically a publication of some kind. So FHN Gaze, and then Publicon. Again, it was just something that just kind of seemed to flow to give really only just a general idea of things. As for the screenplay itself, one thing that I knew from the beginning that I wanted to do is to have these people from this ancient civilization talk in an unusual way. And this was tricky a little bit because I knew that for this to be effective and for people to follow along with it, it needed to be either English or some made-up language and then have English subtitles. I didn't feel like that I could pull off the made-up language and have it not be just totally silly. So I thought, let's give them a modified version of English. And by that I mean, it's going to be mostly English, but there's going to be certain phrases or words that they use just in a different way than we do. The implication to give a general idea that language has evolved since then. Now, it's silly, the idea that it's built on English, I get that. But again, the target audience of this I knew was English, so I wanted it to be English enough for that purpose, for practical reasons, but to have kind of a weird way of saying certain phrases and words so that it would seem, in a way, primitive, yet somehow still educated sounding. It was a weird balance to strike, and the inspiration that I used was a book that I read long ago by Anthony Burgess called A Clockwork Orange. Many of you have seen the movie for that. Very few of you, I bet, have read the book. The book is just excellent. And the entire book is written in this, well, that book is set in the future, so it's English that has evolved in a forward direction, and all this strange slang and words that we, ways of using words we just don't use are pervasive throughout the entire text of that book. It's fascinating. What's really interesting about it is that when you first start reading it, it's very disorienting, and by the time you get into the book, you have no trouble following it at all. The movie hints to that a little bit in some of the narration that goes on, but the book, it really, Burgess just really, he spent a lot of time on that, from what I understand, developing that approach to try and imitate what happens to language in, as time passes, how it evolves and changes, and we can see evidence of that in our own world. Just have somebody show you or recite for you Old English. You can hardly understand a bit of it, but every once in a while you do pick up on little words or parts of words that have a familiarity to them, and you can see how those fragments evolved and then survived unto this day, but we just use them differently. So that was the general idea that I wanted to go for. Even though we were going to be moving backwards, that's the approach that I thought would work best, is I start by writing this screenplay in regular English. Then, as I revise it, I go through and start doing some different phrasing and word substitution and things like that, very carefully, very methodically, doing that throughout the script, to just taint it up a little bit, to make it different and weird, but still intelligible for the most part. I did not use any AI tools for that part of the process. Again, partly just on principle, but partly because AI tools are not good at that. So for production to begin, I needed to get familiar with and survey what tools that NeuralViz used for his project, and kind of make some decisions there on how I was going to approach things. So the tools that he's used over time have evolved. He's made some changes to tune up his process. So some of these may be a little bit out of date. Some of them are more current than what he uses. But I know that he used something called Hedra for lip syncing, and made heavy use of Midjourney images. And audio was 11 Labs. Now, he also made use of Luma.ai and made extensive use of Runway to handle some of the animated elements, particularly the animations of the characters talking. He also used Kling AI, Halo AI, and Udio is what he used for music. Now, when he used 11 Labs for the voice, he used archives.gov, which is a Library of Congress database, I believe, of audio files, and he basically used those to create voice profiles in 11 Labs, and then ran his performances through that to get some unique sounding voices. Sound effects, he used Motion Array. Now, some of those tools I was familiar with or had free subscriptions with and had available. Some of them I did not. So I made some substitutions after surveying the creation abilities of all those tools and made use of what I had available. So what I ended up using was I used Runway heavily. That's the Act 1 feature of Runway is really what drives all the performances in this, in terms of the visual performances. I used 11 Labs to process voices with a very similar process that he used, except I found that the archives.gov website and database was just a nightmare to navigate and work with. So what I instead did is I went through and used some voice samples from LibriVox, which is it's a free site where people basically create audiobooks with their own voice and record them, and then they're released free for the public. So I basically used some different voices from there to create the profiles in 11 Labs, and then ran my own voice performances through the voice changer in 11 Labs to make that happen. I made some use of Grok, which is on Twitter/X, for some still image generation. I did some other still image generation from a tool called artspace.ai. And Sora I used for some very minor, like B-roll type stuff, video generation. And it was always image to video. Then I made use of Meshy AI, which it's a text to 3D model generation tool. And I'll explain why when we get to that point, that's not a type of tool that mapped to anything that NeuralViz used, but I ended up needing it for one particular scene, and I'll explain that. Sound effects, I used 11 Labs for that. They have a very excellent sound effects generator, so for any sound effects I needed that weren't in my own library already, I used that to whip those up. And finally, Suno is what I ended up using for the music. I just preferred it over Udio. Now, how did I make those decisions? Some of it, like I said, was these are tools that I had already gotten some familiarity with, and some of it just came down to price. I knew this wasn't going to be a zero budget film, but I wanted to keep the costs as low as possible. So other than that, the non-AI tools that I used are things like Microsoft Word for the Screenplay, or I use PaintShop Pro for graphics editing. I did some simple audio editing with Goldwave. I used OBS Studio to do some video capture for certain things. I did end up using iClone 8 for one scene of 3D animation and one composite overlay that I did. I used a tool called Topaz Video AI purely for some video upscaling, and I'll get to why that is. I used Cubase 12 Pro for audio mixing and mastering, mainly because that's a tool I'd already paid for, and I've been using it for years, so it was just, it's familiar, it works with my process. And finally, DaVinci Resolve Studio 19 is what I used for the video editing and compositing. So for the characters in this film, I knew that first of all, I would need an image of each character, or multiple images of each character, in order to ultimately be used for image to video to animate their performances. But first of all, I needed images of what these characters would look like. So I ended up, after testing out a couple different image sources, I ended up leaning on ChatGPT, believe it or not, for these. That just gave me the best results for what I wanted. And it was that this is the only real text to image, that's the main text to image that I used for the project. So I described the images that I wanted to ChatGPT, and I emphasized that I wanted them on a plain background. I wanted to get it on a solid background, but I couldn't get any of the image generators to do that with any consistency. So I settled for what ended up being a light gray, slightly gradient background. And that was enough for me to easily mask out the part of the image that I didn't want shown anymore. So I ended up doing characters for all the people who have speaking parts in this, using ChatGPT to make those. That's just the still images for those characters. So voices, as I mentioned before, this is a process that I ended up finding the most valuable in terms of this is a tool that will be helpful to me going forward. Essentially, the way that this works is you have a voice profile, which is basically, it's like a palette for what a voice sounds like. And using 11 Labs, basically I recorded my own performance of the script for each of the characters, and then ran my performance through this voice changer profile to essentially change the tonality and timbre of the voice to match this profile. And so that's how I, with the voice you're hearing right now, basically, is what was run through that to get the voices that are on the screen. Now, mind you, one thing that it appears to me that 11 Labs, at least in its current iteration, does not do is accents. What I mean by that is if your source voice has an accent, which a lot of mine did. I went through and carefully picked them out from these audiobook recordings, and I focused largely on Russian literature because I wanted some nice accents and was able to find some profiles in there that were very nice, kind of heavy accents. And I used that to create the voice profile in 11 Labs, but when I went to run my speech through it, it took the tonality of their voice and applied it to my pronunciation and accent. It did not give me, like I couldn't take my Midwestern accent and speak it through 11 Labs and have it come out sounding Irish or something. It just doesn't work that way. Not right now. So what I had to do for characters like Rashad, who has this very distinct way of pronouncing things, and even kind of, he has that distinctively Russian feature of V's and W's are kind of swapped around, and he says nothing instead of nothing. I had to do all that. So, I'm not great at that, but I'm probably better than some. But if you need a character with a specific accent, you need a voice actor, is what you need. That's what I learned. You should use a voice actor. Or, if you've got a voice actor with the right accent, but maybe you want to gender swap them, or maybe you want to make them have this old grovelly voice when their voice is not like that, then 11 Labs would be helpful to you. But if you just think that you can just record your own voice in your own accent and have it sound suddenly like you're a Kiwi or that you're, Mongolian, it's not going to happen. You have to basically, your performance needs to have the accent involved. So I'll show you an example here of what some of these voices sounded like with my performance, and then what they sounded like after running through 11 Labs. So first of all, let me give you a taste of what one of the profile sources sounded like. So this is the source profile for Reshot. This is basically it's part of a LibreVox recording, and this I had about 60 seconds of this that I edited so that a lot of different word types were covered. That's a good thing to do when you're making a voice profile. So this is what I submitted into 11 Labs to get it to create a voice profile.
For instance, if I had 2,300 rubles now, I could make 20,000 in 2 weeks.
Okay. Now, here is my performance of that character's part from the screenplay.
Tell you what. Why don't you open faceholes with Göbekli after KB destroys the world with this lunatic experiment?
Okay. And now, combining those things together with 11 Labs voice changer, this was the end result.
Tell you what. Why don't you open faceholes with Göbekli after KB destroys the world with this lunatic experiment?
And here are some of the other characters that I did that same approach with.
Now that I've had time to me-think his thought picture, my facehole noise is... Who the Gehenna is Krispia Ceratops, you can, eh?
Now that I've had time to me-think his thought picture, my facehole noise is... Who the Gehenna is Krispia Ceratops, you can, eh?
Who he is? Only the single greatest thought painter of the last 25,000 ice winds. That's who.
Who he is? Only the single greatest thought painter of the last 25,000 ice winds. That's who.
25,000 ice winds. Goodness gracious me.
25,000 ice winds. Goodness gracious me.
Until then, I'm Farts McRipplestilts.
Until then, I'm Farts McRipplestilts.
So at this point, I had all the voice performances recorded and modified, and at the pacing that I wanted those lines to be delivered. But I knew that I would need to, early on, start to have a feel for the structure of the overall video, because that would help me make the decisions about which of their voice lines need to actually have face recordings, which ones are going to take place underneath B-roll footage, things like that. So I ended up, as my next step was to assemble the timeline of the video, even though I didn't really have any video yet to speak of. I had an audio track, essentially. But the timing was going to hinge on the audio more than anything. And this would help me also to determine where do I need to score and for how long and etc. So I went into DaVinci Resolve and started building out a timeline. And basically what I did is for each place where I knew there was going to be a clip, if I didn't have a clip, which I didn't have for almost anything here, I would put in some kind of a placeholder that was just text to tell me what goes there. And I did a significant amount of the video editing, weirdly enough, before I had any video. But that was so I could then make a list of everything that's needed from that point and slot those things in. And that seemed to have worked pretty well. I've never done a video quite like that before, in that order. When I'm creating animations with iClone, the audio track, the main, the voice audio track and the animations are rendered as one or more video files. And then that's when I start trimming and putting them together into an edit and stuff like that. But for this one, I wanted to minimize the amount of credits that I would use up with these AI generated tools. So I didn't want to render anything that I knew I didn't need. So that's why I actually started the video editing before I had any video. So when it came time to do the actual video clips of the interviews of people talking on camera, this is where I discovered that I'd made a pretty huge mistake. So let me explain. What I knew that I needed to do with Runway Act 1 was I needed to be able to supply Runway with an image, which those are the ones that I generated from ChatGPT. And then I would need to record a video performance just of myself against a relatively bland background. And what Runway was going to do is going to basically use the image as a filter over my performance and translate the motion to that image. So I upscaled the images that were from ChatGPT because they weren't particularly high res. So I made them nice and big and used a quality upscaler that's built into my image editing software. And then I went to do the interviews and realized that the lip sync was going to be part of the performance I would be recording as a human to run through Runway Act 1. Now here was where my problem was. I had already recorded the voice lines and I had already run them through the voices I want and everything. And I'd worked quite a bit on that and was very happy with it. And now come to find out, I need the voice in the video recording of myself to inject into Act 1. So if I had more time and patience for it, or if I could go back in time and do it again, the smart move would have been to record with a webcam my performances of the lines before I run them. So I'm recording the lines to my audio software, but I'm also capturing the video, and then I would run that then through 11 Labs. But I did things in the wrong order because I didn't know what I was doing. So what I ended up having to do was I ended up having to lip sync the performance videos that are going to go into Runway. So I sat in front of a web camera and I queued up the audio that I'd already recorded and run through 11 Labs. And I would play that audio back, and I had to try to lip sync and do the body performances of these characters. And it took quite a few takes because the only cue that I had, if there was any other audio that was going to play, it would influence what Runway would end up trying to do. So I couldn't have any audio cues for when the speaking was happening. I had to watch the waveform on the screen and then time how I would start talking, and I had to say the lines or mouth the lines exactly the same way that I had performed them. Yeah, that wasn't real smart. So the end result is there's little idiosyncrasies of the lip sync that aren't quite on. And the reason for that is because I wasn't actually speaking the lines you hear at the same time that I was recording my mouth moving for those lines. It's crazy. So I ended up getting it close enough to where I was happy with it. But if I scrutinize, if I watch it too many times, if I look real close, there's parts of it that just are like a millisecond off. But I got it as close as I could. So learn from me. If you're going to be doing this process, You want to capture video of when you are actually recording your lines. So then I run them through Act 1, and this is the result. So I'll show you here, for one of the characters, I'll show you, this is the performance that I recorded with my webcam.
And we will all stop leaving. Have I a divergent? Hear it. This world is not one land. It is many. And these merry lands, they're flawed.
Here's the image that I submitted to Runway Act 1. And then now here is what the end result of the merger of those two things ended up looking like and sounding like.
Have I a divergent? Hear it. This world is not one land. It is many. And these merry lands, they're flawed.
And here that is for the other characters.
And in the clear majority of those simulate tests, there was no catastrophic outcome. And in the clear majority of those simulate tests, there was no catastrophic outcome.
Hear it. It's the kind of lunatic we need.
I mean, it's like something out of a Rankar Musfrit's story scroll. It's so ridiculous.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have this week.
So one of the limitations of Runway Act 1, at least at the time that I was using it, is it doesn't really work with hands in the picture. In fact, they very clearly tell you, keep your hands out of the video when you're recording your source video for Runway Act 1, because, yeah, the hands will go a little wild. And, I mean, we all know AI's never been real great with hands anyway, but it's, yeah, it can really mess things up. So I needed to crop my characters so that their hands were either still and near the bottom of the frame, or ideally just off the camera altogether. Now there were a couple spots on one of the characters where their hand did do a weird thing, but I was able to fix that later with a video edit to cover over it to where it wasn't shown. But there was one scene where I needed a character to hold up a book for the camera and then pull it down again and continue talking. There was no way to do that with Runway Act 1. So what I ended up doing was pulling out iClone. And what I did with iClone is I created the arm. Well, actually it's a whole character, but they're positioned in such a way that their body is off the screen. And I set the camera so that their arm would be visible, and holding a book, which I did a custom cover for. And then I animated the motion of, basically I had determined, because of my video edit, I had determined that the scene, that particular scene would start with the book being held up, and then it would just drop out of the way and the character would talk. So I animated that, doing some skin tone matching between the arm and the character photo. Created the book, put it in their hand, did the animation, keyframed animation of the book being lowered down, and recorded that over a blank or alpha background, and then essentially composited that in later. So here's what that ends up looking like. Now, once I had all the main footage done of the interviews, which is the bulk of this documentary, there were clearly some points where I was going to need some B-roll footage of different types. So to generate those, I created images with either ChatGPT's image generator or Grok's image generator. Grok actually did a really nice job on some of these, and it's the one place where Grok really shined. So I created those still images with ChatGPT Plus or Grok, and then I upsized them first of all, and then I brought those into Runway and or Sora and ran enough image to video iterations until I had what I needed. It's never right on the first try, it seems like, with these. You have to try and try and try again, and maybe experiment with some text prompts to coach it along, only to have Sora in particular is just horrible at following your instructions. It almost does, in almost every case, Sora does better when you don't tell it anything. You just give it an image and you just kind of cross your fingers and hope. You'll end up getting a more successful result more quickly than if you try to tell it what to do. I don't know what's going on with it. It like doesn't even listen at all. Runway is better with that. So I used those to generate various forms of B-roll that I knew I would need. Now, one thing for all of the video that's generated from these various things that we've gone through so far. So this applies to Runway Act 1. It applies to straight up Runway and Sora for these videos. One thing that they don't do, at least at the subscription tier I was using, which was the lowest possible, they don't deliver these up in very high resolution at all. Like many of the videos that were spit out for this, the biggest was 720p, but most of them were 480p for like B-roll. And I knew that that wasn't going to look great because I really wanted to release this in 4K. So that's where Topaz Video AI came in really handy. So this is a tool that you can purchase and it runs on your computer. It's not a cloud service. And you can queue up and set the parameters for upscaling. And it takes a while to do these most of the time. Even for small clips, it can take a little while. So it's a good one to set up a queue and then process the queue like overnight or something when you don't need the computer. It's not too terrible for short clips, I guess, but it doesn't take zero time. It takes some time to do it, but the result is quite nice. Like, it's a good quality image. It's not perfect, but it's certainly better than just letting your video editor try to stretch and upsize a 480p video to 4K. That's not going to look good at all. So that's when I used Topaz for all of these clips. Any clips that got put on the timeline in DaVinci Resolve, I had first run those through Topaz Video AI to get them to the right resolution. So everything was starting to come together. There was still some spots that I needed to fill, but there was one area in particular that I knew I wanted to have on this video, and I just wasn't sure exactly how best to do it. So that would be an intro of some kind of like, the kind of film logo intro that you see at the beginning of TV shows or movies. I thought, let's just do one of those for this FHN Gaze Publicon production company that this is supposedly being made by. So I tried a variety of image to video and text to video through Runway and Sora, and couldn't get anything that just worked right for this. I needed it to kind of be something that had some motion, but in a very controlled way, where there was kind of a central aspect of the motion that would keep the image a little bit steady. And I just could not get that out of either of those engines, and not for lack of trying. It was very difficult. So at that point, I decided I'm just going to do this in iClone, because I know what I need, and I know generally, certainly with the camera move, that was the hardest part to get either of those to obey me on. The camera move, I can be really precise with it and get it just right in iClone. And if you were using Blender, you could have used that too. So I knew I needed some objects that weren't just plain primitives. I wanted this to have some very specific looking icons as part of the 3D image. And I looked through my own collection and a collection of models over at fab.com. Normally a very good source, but I couldn't find specifically what I was looking for. So on a recommendation from a fellow iCloner, I tried out Meshy, Meshy.ai. And I basically did a text to 3D model prompt for a couple parts of this intro that I knew that I would need. And it did a superb job. I mean, it took several tries. If there's anything that you need to know about AI tools, it's that you're almost never going to get what you want on the first try. That's why the pay by credits thing is frustrating to most people, because you'll burn a lot of credits not getting what you want. And that's true even for Meshy, although Meshy, frankly, is a lot stronger at following its prompts than most AI engines that I've seen. It's quite good. And some of it is you have to learn how to prompt right. You know, I can't put it all on the engines. You got to know how to use the English prompting language to get it to give you what you want. Even then, it may not get it right the first time, but a good prompt is going to make a lot of difference there. So I was able to generate those models, export them as FBX, and then I brought them into iClone, set up a scene. You know, the Meshy part I probably spent 30 minutes there, not including waiting for generations. The actual iClone took less than 30 minutes. Like, once I had all the raw materials, I opened up iClone, I did it all in one sitting, less than 30 minutes from setup to render. So it was one of those instances where I was like, the next time that I hear someone say, oh, AI is just so much faster, maybe, but not for everything, you know? This was traditional anime. I rendered it out at 4K. High res, it was so fast. I didn't get anything else done on this project done in less than 30 minutes, except the 3D scene in iClone. So go figure. So this is what the intro ended up looking like. And this was built, other than the logo that's over the top, this was built and animated entirely within iClone. So we were getting closer and closer to the finish line here, and there were a few things that I needed that had to do with just static graphics, essentially. So those of you who are Photoshop connoisseurs, you'll snicker when I tell you that I use Paint Shop Pro, because it's quite a bit less powerful tool. Not really considered a serious tool for a graphic artist, but here's the thing, I'm not a graphic artist. I'm not. And I first bought Paint Shop Pro in 1997 or 98. And I've been upgrading it over the years. Every 3 years or so, I buy the latest version. It's just the platform that I know. And for the stuff that I need to get done, I can get it done very efficiently in Paint Shop Pro. And so, not knocking Photoshop at all. If you know Photoshop, use Photoshop. It's a much more powerful tool, and you can probably get stuff done faster than I can because you know it. But I don't know it. And I don't want to pay for it. Paint Shop Pro is much, much, much cheaper. So, that's what I use. So that's what I used to make logos and overlays, and the Pangea map. Basically, I grabbed and kind of traced an image that I found online of Pangea, and then colorized it myself, and added these little overlays in layers to make this map scene, because the map scene was going to be used in a few different places and was going to be pretty important. So that's what I used for any graphics editing that I needed to do, is just my image editor, which is Paint Shop Pro. You probably use Photoshop or GIMP or something like that. Sound is one of my favorite parts of making films, probably because I knew about audio and music and sound effects before I ever started making any kinds of films. So I've been doing audio for a long time. I've actually done the full audio like sound design and mixing, and even some incidental music for a feature-length machinima film called Bloodspell. So I've got a huge library of sounds. I've been collecting them for years. So many of the things that I needed for this were there. But for the ones that weren't, I decided to try something new. And instead of, looking through Freesound, which is a great resource, and that's probably where you should go for most stuff if you need new sound effects. Just be mindful of the licensing. Give credit when asked to. But I thought, let's give 11 Labs a try. 11 Labs has a text to sound effects generator with its paid subscription. And it worked great. I'm sounding like a broken record here, but again, AI tools rarely get stuff right the first time. You just have to plan on, it's going to take a few tries and some tweaking of your wording to get exactly what you want. But 11 Labs for sound effects was really, really easy to work with. Like, just easy. So I used that for a few incidental sound effects that I needed here and there. But many of the sound effects I ended up just using from existing libraries that I'd already bought and paid for. Music was interesting and was probably the part of this that I was dreading the most. Because I'm a musician, I'm a composer. The thought of having a machine generate music for me just seemed, silly. Why would I mean, it's one thing if I wanted to paint the Mona Lisa, because I can't do that, but I can make music. I'm happy with the music that I make, so why would I want to do this? But I was committed to the experiment, so I thought, let's just hold my nose and give this a try. Much to my surprise, I had a blast using Suno. I had a blast. It was just a lot of fun. Now, is it something that I would want to use as my main process for things? No. And there's a few reasons for that. One, I feel like if I did that, it would slowly but surely bleed away all motivation to make my own music. And I've actually seen that happen to a fellow composer who kind of went down the rabbit hole of AI-generated music and got so discouraged by how easy it was to get somewhat decent sounding stuff out of it that he hasn't composed a thing on his own since. That's heartbreaking to me. And I'd like to think that I'm immune from that, but I don't know. I just wouldn't want to chance it. So that disclaimer out of the way, it was a lot of fun. And maybe it was a lot of fun for me because I am a musician. Because I was able to manipulate and prompt and mess with Suno as a musician in ways that someone who's not got a musical background probably wouldn't think to do. And the result is that I was able to crank out some basic background music that was theme appropriate for different sections of the video. It was not difficult for me to do. Your results may vary. And once again, AI tools almost never get it right the first time. Expect to burn through some credits and expect to experiment a lot to get any kind of result. Now, the other thing you got to be cautious about with Suno is you never, ever, ever, ever want to use Suno music in a production if you've made it with the free subscription, because there are no commercial rights associated with that whatsoever. In fact, no rights to use the music off-platform, except maybe, I guess, in your own music library you could. Frankly, they're so restrictive on it that I don't understand why they even offer music for download to free. If you're going to be that restrictive, why even let people download it? The good thing is that Suno subscription is pretty cheap right now. I think it's like $10 a month, and you're not locked in for a year or anything like that. So you could sign up for a month, $10, and you get something like 2,500 or 3,000 credits, which it's not one credit per song, but you can generate quite a bit of music with that, like a lot. And it's good. It gives you room to experiment and see what you like and stuff like that. So Suno was a lot of fun. And I think that at the end of the day, what I've concluded about Suno with regard to AI-generated music and the impact that will have on creators of real music, I would summarize it like this. If you're a composer whose specialty is generic corporate background music, you are in trouble. You are in real trouble. This tech is going to eliminate that as an industry. If you're a composer who makes thoughtful, unique pieces, you have nothing to worry about. That's what I'll say about it. I'm not saying that Suno can't make good sounding stuff. It can. But if it's anything other than just backdrop music, it lacks a soul that if you have any discernment in your ear whatsoever, you can hear in Suno music. And I think that is going to remain an elusive element of any AI-generated work, is that it's going to lack a certain special sauce that a human creator brings to things. It's always going to lack that because it can never possess that. That's my view on it. So Suno was fun. I had a great time using it, I'm not going to lie. But I'm also I'm glad that I'm done with it. At least, for this type of purpose. I may experiment with it some more if I can figure out how to do so in an ethical and a creative way. All right, so up to this point, I had laid out in my video editor what I'm going to call a scratch set of audio tracks. Scratch meaning that they're in there for the purposes of timing, and that's about it. Like, I do not do my audio mixing in my video editor. Now, if you have DaVinci Resolve, it's fully capable of doing that, but I've used Cubase for decades, and it's a much more powerful tool for a musician. It's got options that DaVinci Resolve will never have. So I do all my mixing over there. And it means an extra step, but the workflow, the pipeline is such that it doesn't slow me down at all. If you're going to do your audio editing outside of something like Resolve, whatever you edit audio in, you need multiple tracks. You need the ability to bring in effects in a controllable way. So just using free Audacity is not really going to be a good experience there. Even the freeware or the single user version of Goldwave, that's only one track. It's not, stereo, 2 tracks, but it's not a multi-track editor. You need a multi-track. You need a DAW, D-A-W. There are several options out there, including some that are almost no cost or some that are even zero cost. So look for one of those, get to know it if you want to do sound. But that's where I do my sound, is in Cubase. And at that point, everything gets isolated onto its own track. I tweak EQ, I tweak effects, I normalize volumes and add reverb and tune it all and listen to it on different sound systems and things like that to try and get it as good as I can. And when I'm done with the sound mix in Cubase, then I export that out to a WAV file, highest quality that I can, stereo. One stereo file of the final mix. And then I take that over into Resolve and plop it onto a new track and line it up with the beginning, and everything is synced. And then I can mute out or delete my scratch tracks, because they were there just to help me with timing anyway. So that's how we end up with the final sound and music edit. So video editing, as I've mentioned, I do in DaVinci Resolve, version 19 as of the time that I made this video. And that's where I do any motion graphics that are needed. Very basic, stuff like the on-screen title that rolls out when each person speaks in this documentary style. And what I did with that is I actually I created an image or a set of images for this scroll that's going to be the backdrop, and then I used DaVinci Resolve to animate and bring that in and do what I need to with it there. So that's the kind of motion graphics I'm talking about, is basic overlays and positioning and moving of things and stuff like that. DaVinci Resolve is incredibly powerful. Like, it's got the ability to do some node-based editing and color correction and all of those types of things. And it's got a module called Fusion, which is, again, node-based, and you can like layer together different effects and motions and 3D manipulation and transforms and all of that stuff to do just absolutely amazing things. So this video didn't really call for a whole lot of that, but I did have any of that I needed to do. I did that in DaVinci Resolve. All right, so let's talk budget. First of all, time. This video ended up being 9 minutes and 14 seconds long. And the amount of time that I spent creating the video from start to finish. I'm talking from crafting the idea all the way to, which, by the way, I kept track of all the time on what I spent on every single task in here, and the single item that I spent the most time on was crafting the idea. That's 4 hours up front right there of, it probably was technically a little more time than that, but absolutely 4 hours was just on crafting the idea before I even wrote a single word of the screenplay. So that was just a lot of pondering, a lot of driving around thinking about it and making notes and all that. Anyway, the total time spent on the film was 60.5 hours. Now that, for a 9-minute created from nothing film, that's not a horrible number, but it's also not mind-blowingly efficient either. A 9-minute film in iClone that's of good quality and jumps locations and has multiple characters and stuff like that, it would probably take a little longer than that. Probably, when it's all said and done. So I still had to spend quite a bit of time on this film, even though I'm using all these quote-unquote easy tools. Now, about 46 hours of that time, or the first 3/4 of that time, was up into where I had what I call a video edit for timing. In other words, at 46 hours, I had everything in the timeline that I've, at least a first draft. Everything that came after that was what I would call definitely post-production, which is, some of the end credits design and the actual editing and tweaking, and in some cases going and reshooting some B-rolls to make them fit better, and the audio mixing, the final video editing. That was the last quarter of the project. So actual, what do you call it? Principal photography, I guess, and writing was 46 hours. The total time spent was 60.5 hours. As of the money, what I ended up spending was 1 month of 11 Labs, the $22 a month subscription, just 1 month. 1 month of ChatGPT Plus at $20, and that included some access to Sora, which I used. ChatGPT, the only thing I used it for other than its access to Sora was it's got a halfway decent image generator in there. So I used that. What I like about ChatGPT for image generation, by the way, is that it seems to be better at interpreting your prompts. It's more versatile. You can be more conversational with your prompts and even have some back and forth discussion of what you want before it tries to generate it. It's not perfect at that, but it's better than, my experience with Midjourney is you kind of have to know a whole new language to really get the most out of Midjourney. And if you've invested time and learned that, good on you. But I'm coming at this from more of this isn't my normal bread and butter. So the conversational approach from ChatGPT was helpful. So $20 a month got me a month of access to that, and more importantly, Sora. I had access to Grok because I'm a premium subscriber on X. So technically I should count that because I don't think Grok is fully available unless you're a premium user. If I'm wrong on that, let me know. But premium is $84 a year, so I'm going to count that as part of the expense on the film. Sora, I did 1 month of Pro at $10. That's the music generator. Runway, I did 1 month at their $35 subscription, and then I ended up purchasing $30 in additional credits during that month to be able to generate all the scenes, the Act 1 plus B-rolls that I needed. The total credits used on Runway, by the way, were right around 5,000 credits. That's what that ended up being with the subscription plus the additional credits. Meshy AI, I actually got done what I needed with it with the free trial. But if you're interested in that tool, it's a very reasonable subscription. And finally, artspace.ai. That is a AI image generation tool that actually first came about before Midjourney was even anything other than just a Discord server. And it was a buy it once and own it forever kind of thing, and the guy keeps updating it. And it does a pretty decent job at certain types of image generation. I ended up using it very lightly in this production, but it's a very decent tool, at least for the price that I got it for. And I don't even remember what that is, but I want to say it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $60. That was several years ago that I purchased that. So, all right, so this is what that total, if we were to assume that all these expenses were incurred in the course of 1 month, that's what the total ended up being. That's actually a little more than what I typically would attribute as costs of an iClone film that I make, and that's because I don't have to buy assets. That's really the only expense of making films with iClone, is if you need additional 3D assets. I don't have to buy new assets for every film that I make, so those end up being quite a bit cheaper. Just a quick review of the other tools that I used. That some of them are commercial, so you have to figure that they have expense with them. Microsoft Word, of course, is part of a Microsoft subscription. I use that for the Screenplay. PaintShop Pro is a one-time purchase, somewhere around $50 or $60, I think. Graphics editing. Goldwave, I bought a long time ago. I don't remember how much that was. I think it was about $35 when I bought it. It's a one-time purchase. They have a shareware model still that you can use. Goldwave is in every way, I think, superior to Audacity. It can do everything Audacity can do, and then it has additional features as well, and it's just easier to work with, I find. OBS Studio, that is free. I used that to capture my webcam recordings, which were the source footage used to power the Runway Act 1 performances. iClone 8. That's several $100s, but it's something I purchased several years ago. And I used that really just for one animation overlay, the hand, and also the intro of the video. Topaz Video AI, that's a one-time purchase. I can't remember the price on that, but I paid for it and a couple years ago when I was doing some upscaling for some other stuff. So it's been handy. Cubase 12 Pro. That's not a cheap piece of software at all, but as a musician, that's a part of my kit. So I've had that for a while. I think Cubase is now on version 14 or 15. And then DaVinci Resolve Studio 19. DaVinci Resolve has a free version that is quite capable in many regards. There was some features that I needed a while back that made me go ahead and spend it's about $300 for the full version of Resolve Studio, and I absolutely love it. I came to DaVinci Resolve Studio straight from Sony Vegas, and the only reason that I did, because I was shying away from it because of the learning curve I was afraid of, but I was most afraid of the problem that drove me to it was Sony Vegas kept crashing on my Windows 11 computer. And I tried to reach out to support, and they were completely unhelpful. So it was kind of a spiteful thing. But I ended up saying, you know what? I'm switching to this. And I used the free version for about a year. And only then ran into some effects and things that I wanted to be able to venture into that I needed the full version for, so I upgraded it to that, and I love it. DaVinci Resolve's support, by the way, is fantastic. Yeah. There was one point where Topaz Video, the AI upscaler that I have, it has a plug-in for DaVinci Resolve, and it was causing, some update had caused DaVinci Resolve to just crash when it would load, which I was starting to, of course, panic a little bit. And I reached out to DaVinci Resolve and gave them the error, and they responded in less than 24 hours on a weekend and told me exactly what the problem was and how to fix it. That's pretty impressive. You don't see many software companies that do that, but I guess it's Blackmagic Design is the company behind DaVinci Resolve. They were pretty sharp on that day. So anyway, yeah, that's the overall budget. So yeah, what's the overall result here then? My final thoughts. I'm pretty happy with the film. I thought it might get a little bit more attention, but there is a lot of content in this space that's competing for the same eyeballs. And, and that's fine. I'm still, even though it didn't get a ton of audience attention, I'm pleased with it as a educational project. I learned a lot. Now, what did I learn? Well, it didn't really change my overall view on AI. Not really, I guess. But what it did do is it made me appreciate the process of how I normally make films with iClone, or if it's Machinima with video games. Made me appreciate that even more. Weirdly. I don't even know how to explain why that is, other than to just say, I didn't really like this process very much. Maybe if I did it more, I would grow to like it, but I have no motivation to do that. I really like my process. I like handcrafting things. There's something about that process that is more fulfilling. And maybe it comes down to this. Of that time that I spent on this film, what did we say that the total time was? 60 hours or so? I feel like I spent half that time either waiting on AI to generate something or being angry at AI for not doing it right the first time or the second time or sometimes the third or fourth time. When I run into something in iClone that's not working right, I've got control of all the elements leading up to that problem, and I know how to track it down and fix it. So having AI involved in the film was kind of like having an employee that's just not a very good employee on your staff that is your assistant director. That's what having AI involved in the filmmaking was like for me. Is I've got somebody, I'm paying them, and at least 3/4 of the time, I really feel like they don't listen to what I'm saying at all. They don't do what they're told. They take a long time to get stuff done. Yeah. That's my experience with AI. So it really doesn't even come down to there's the whole ethical quandary around it, right? And there's the, it's just, you just feel like a better person and a better human when you support human artists, right? There's no denying that. But for me, just looking at it through a practical lens, the reason that I didn't like AI was because, well, it's just not very good at what it does. It doesn't listen. It doesn't. And the thing is that, like, I can imagine what this would have been like even if it had listened. And even then, if I didn't have to spend any time waiting for it, correcting it, cursing at it when it wasn't listening, if I didn't have to spend any time doing those things, I still wouldn't like this more than the process of actually making something with my own hands. So there's no denying that there's elements of this process that are enticing, that would be enticing to people. I love the 11 Labs voice changing thing. I just love it because I can then, I'm limited right now by how many voices I can personally impersonate. And, there's only so many I've got in my bag. It's maybe more than the average person, but it's not a lot. And I can't sound like a female at all. And for the kinds of productions that I do, sometimes I just need to be able to do all the performances, and I want to. It's one of the things I really love doing. And 11 Labs enhances my ability to do that with a good result. Now, for larger projects, working with voice actors is a much more appealing idea to me. But for little one-offs and stuff, just going through the whole casting process and auditioning and then hoping that the person delivers the lines with the right sound quality and audio fidelity and then that they're interpreting what you want out of emphasis properly. That is part of working with actors, and I get it, and I'm not dissing that at all. But a lot of the stuff that I'm using is short-term projects and skits and things like that where I just need something done, and I've got limited time to get it done. And I don't have a budget to pay voice actors, which would be the respectful thing to do if you can. So 11 Labs is appealing for that reason, but the rest of it I can do without. I've seen enough of Runway Act 1 to go, that's pretty neat. But do I want to make that my modus operandi? No, I do not. I do not. It's just not as fulfilling to make movies this way versus the way that I've been making them. Speaking of other stuff that I've made, if you aren't familiar with the rest of my work, I'd encourage you to check out my YouTube channel. You can look at the more recent stuff or stuff over the years. I've tried to keep the channel pretty clear of any gunk buildup and just focused on stuff that I'm at least somewhat happy with. Most of my content is oriented around comedy, some of it around music. Occasionally I sneak in a little drama here and there, but all of it with a machinima or video game type of aesthetic as far as the animation goes. And I try to make it fun or enlightening or intelligent or focus on detail. So if that's your bag, check out the channel, see what else I work on. I also do some music. If you really like the AI stuff, I have made a few things that are, pretty AI-centric. I'll include a playlist for that in the description on this video below if you'd like to see some of the other stuff that I've done with AI prior to this. I'm a part of a podcast that I mentioned at the top of this video, and now for something completely machinima, where me and 3 of my cohorts that I've known for many, many years, we get together once a week and talk about machinima films. We review them, we discuss them, we talk about news related to independent film creation like this. We'd love to have you listen and join in the conversation there. So I'll include a link to that in the description as well. It's the Completely Machinima Podcast. You can find that on Spotify or on YouTube or anywhere where you listen to podcasts. The Apple Podcast app has it as well. So yeah, that is that. Now, if you'd like to really go crazy and support what I do here, I do have a little Patreon. And for that, you can actually join it for free. Or if you can throw a few bucks a month at it, that helps fund things going forward. I would say it's a pretty safe bet that your contribution there is not going to go to fund use of future AI tools. I do not believe in money sinks. I don't want to spend money that way. It will be to fund future productions of good animation quality, more laughs, more thoughtful content, that kind of thing. So if you'd like to support me in that way, I would appreciate it in ways I don't know how to communicate. So thanks very much. I hope that this was interesting and helpful, and have a great day.